All right, I thought it was time to talk some football on this podcast. Basketball, we've talked it a lot here, but Tom Fornelli, I know you're a huge Illini fan, being from Illinois. Not often I can say we need to talk football on this pod, but Illini fans with basketball a little frustrated right now.
Yeah, I'm one of them. I mean, it's been a difficult team to kind of get a read on. It's different from game to game. It would be nice if they just had a second player who could shoot over 30% from three in conference play. That would probably go a long way, but I don't know. It feels like wishful thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you. But that's not why we had you on the pod. Illinois football was good in 2022, relatively, Tom. And as an Illinois guy, someone who covers the sport so closely, how would you describe what watching that season was like when Illinois was kind of relevant, despite a not so great finish?
It's kind of funny because in this job, pretty much since I started covering the sport full time for a living, there really haven't been many good Illini football seasons. So there hasn't been much time when I'm working where Illinois was relevant to what I had to do for work. So for me this year, having Illini games that not only mattered as far as the team was concerned, but were important in both the Big Ten because they were in the Big Ten West race for a while. That game against Michigan late in the season where they nearly knocked off the Wolverines, just having them in the discussion all season long and people actually asking me about Illinois football, which is not something that happens outside of this podcast anywhere else. It was really fun. And it was just interesting and kind of something to adjust to. And it was a happy adjustment. And it's one I hope I have to keep making every season for the next few years. In fact, I hope I have to start talking about Illinois as a playoff team here soon.
Yeah. What was most memorable for you about this season, Tom?
Just there wasn't really one specific moment. Honestly, I think the Michigan game nearly knocking them off. And then if you want to, like Bret did, if you want to point to maybe a few calls there late in the game that kind of impacted the outcome there, yeah, that's memorable. But I just think overall, going into a Saturday as an Illini football fan and not dreading it, like not being scared of what the possible outcome could be, going into a Saturday thinking, all right, no, we can win this game. We should win this game. And frankly, if we don't win the game, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed in this team. So having that kind of impact overall, it's not really one moment. It's just the general feeling I had watching them all year where they were competent. And it's been a while since we've seen Illinois have good players. We've seen Illinois be good in specific areas. That was the most complete, competent football team I have seen in the Illini uniform in a long time. So just having that go on a weekly basis where it's like, man, we aren't going to embarrass ourselves. We might not win, but we can compete with anybody that they're putting on the schedule to face us.
I was about to ask you, what do you think Bret Bielema has brought to the program? And I don't think there's a better word than competency, right? Like it is not that hard to make bowl games. Like every other team in the Big Ten outside of maybe Rutgers, Indiana, and Minnesota's done it here the last several years under PJ Fleck and Jerry Kill. So next step with Bret Bielema, what do you think they are capable of long-term here with Bret Bielema as its head coach?
Well, it's kind of hard to gauge because I don't know what the heck this conference is going to look like, honestly, a few years from now, because when you throw USC and UCLA into the mix, it jumbles everything up in a way that it's hard to anticipate. Because when Nebraska joined the conference, you looked at Nebraska's history and you thought, oh man, this is going to be another kind of big dog that's going to be in the way that you have to compete with. And Nebraska has really struggled to adapt to life in the Big Ten. So you look at USC and you think it's USC. Of course it's going to be good, but we don't know. We don't know what it's going to be like when the Trojans are having to fly across the country every week to play a game. We don't know what it's like when they might, if they have to adapt the way they play to fit into the Big Ten. You don't know. And then also you just look around at the teams that are in the conference that have been in the conference. Wisconsin going to Luke Fickell. Like Wisconsin has long been a program throughout, my lifetime that you could kind of count on what it was going to be and what the baseline was going to be. Luke Fickell's a great coach. Luke Fickell is bringing in a style of play that we have not seen Wisconsin run or have success with. So even if it's reasonable to think the Badgers are still going to be good, you don't know because that offense is not what Wisconsin's run. Will that fit with what they recruit to, what they can recruit to, and what they're able to do? You don't know. So that there's a lot of variables in there that are hard to figure out. But I think for me, the baseline for what Bret has done in Illinois, and we've already seen a quickly raising of the floor in the program is I think that's just what we're going to be. And it's not just Bret. I think Josh Whitman deserves a lot of credit for what's happened with this program too. I feel like there's more of an alignment in the athletic department than there was for most of my time as an Illini fan. So I think you go into this new footprint and maybe, I mean, the Iowa Wisconsin model is what you try to emulate, is what you want to be, although hopefully with a more exciting offense than what Iowa gets. But just, a competent team year in and year out. And then every once in a while you cycle up. If you've got like a strong senior class, you get to a 10-win season. You compete for a playoff berth. You compete for a Big Ten conference title. And then, like I said, it's going to be much more difficult to do that now when I'm assuming they get rid of divisions. So you're going to have to get through Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, probably USC, the Wisconsins of the world, if they're still up there, if Nebraska comes back. So it's going to be far more difficult to win the conference, I think, in the immediate future. But I also think that Illinois is far more equipped to compete for conference titles than it has been in a very long time.
I think that's a great goal. Is, Illinois fans always say, just get us to bowl games every year, we'll be happy. Then you start doing that, you start making NCAA tournaments, and you want to go far in the NCAA tournament, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. Like, be competitive, and then every once in a while, be in the mix, in the race for the 12-team college football playoff. Like, if you win 10 games, you got a chance to do that, Tom, in the Big Ten.
Yeah, like if you get to November and Illinois is a team that you can't rule out of, like, whether it's the conference title or the at-large berth, I think you're doing very, very well. And I don't think that's that crazy of a goal for this program to have, because I do think we've seen the recruiting floor step up. I just think that the baseline for what this program has been has taken a huge step forward in 2 years under Bret Bielema, that maybe the improvement from, into year 3 cannot be as drastic as it was from year 0 to year 1 and then to year 2. Maybe it's going to be slighter and more, smaller increments, but I don't think that this team has hit the ceiling of what it can be just yet. I think there's plenty of room left to grow.
And Tom, one of the most impressive things I saw when Bret Bielema got hired was the people he was able to bring in on his staff. Like, it just looked like a staff that I thought Iowa fans would have been happy about.
It's a Big Ten staff.
Yeah, right? Like, it just felt like that. What do you think of, you lose Ryan Walters, you lose Kevin Kane, Corey Patterson to Purdue. What do you feel about what he's done to fill out his staff and moving forward?
Well, first, I'm happy for Ryan Walters. I think he deserves to get the shot because he did a fantastic job with the defense here. And it hurts to lose Corey. It hurts to lose Kevin. But I think that if you look at Bret's track record as a coach, from his time at Wisconsin to going to Arkansas, just everywhere he's been as a head coach, he's consistently lost assistants to other jobs. His guys get promoted. They get plucked because he does a good job of building a program. And you typically want to go to programs that have done that when you're trying to build your own program. And he has consistently been able to replace them. And you see with, like, a lot of the guys that are on his current staff, Aaron Henry stepping up into the DC role, Terrence Jamison getting the bump up to the Finellis coming in. These are all guys he used to play for him. Like, he's got his own coaching tree that he has of guys who can come in, who know exactly what he wants, what the game plan is, and how to implement it. So even though you get that turnover in name and person, the system itself pretty much, especially on the defensive side of the ball, remains the same. Now, we've seen some changes to the offensive side of the ball. And to me, Barry Lunny, I thought, somewhat limited last year in what he could do because of what Illinois had at the receiver position. But I think schematically, from what I saw from him, what they were doing at UTSA before he came to Illinois, and what they're trying to do with that offense, I think there's a lot to be excited about there. And as the talent level of the wide receiver position, which is something I know you've talked about on the show, that you're pretty big on what they've been able to do, especially in this recruiting class at the receiver spot. I think as the talent there improves, we're going to see even more growth on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's what's going to be the big key for where this team can be.
Yeah, and I think there should be some optimism going into 2023, Tom, based on the retention of talent. I know more people want Illinois to rank higher on these transfer rankings, but the fact that you don't have guys transferring out or leaping early to the NFL, you get Keith Randolph, Johnny Newton, Isaiah Adams, Julian Pearl back. How does that impact your expectations for Illinois of 2023?
Oh, I think it's huge because they do lose a lot. Like, one of the other adjustments that I've had to make this spring is because, I do mock drafts for CBSSports.com, and it's kind of like my side hustle. I evaluate dudes for the NFL draft, and there's been Illini players that I've told people about in recent years, like, hey, I know this guy isn't going to be a first-round pick, a second-round pick, but this is somebody who can go in the middle rounds that, maybe you should keep an eye on, like guys like Nate Hobbs. There are guys here, Kirby Joseph. This is the first time I've had people coming to me asking me like, "Well, what can you tell me about this Witherspoon kid? What can you tell me about Sidney Brown?" And it's like, "Well, I'm glad you noticed because I've been noticing it for the last few years." But even losing those guys, the defensive line, getting those fellas back, I think is huge because that was the one area I was truly concerned about if they left. I had concerns about the depth that they had up front as far as what was coming behind them too in the current recruiting class. So getting those guys back, I think is huge. It gives you a strong baseline. There's going to be some inexperience in the secondary, but honestly, with the current Big Ten, it's awesome to have a great secondary. We saw that firsthand last year. I would rather have a strong defensive front and then let the secondary learn because in the Big Ten right now, like unless you're playing Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan, you aren't really facing a ton of great passing attacks at this point. So guys have a chance to figure things out and learn on the job before they truly get tested. Now, that could change. Phil Longo coming to Wisconsin, maybe we're going to see some of that quicker than we think, but I still think Wisconsin is going to be leaning on the run game more than it's going to become an air raid throwing the ball all over kind of team. So I don't think too much is going to change there. They should. I would expect defensively they're slow to start, particularly in the secondary, but as the year goes on, and Aaron Henry, I think also too, becomes more accustomed to being the defensive play caller on game days, it's a unit that's probably going to improve as the year goes along. It might not reach the heights it hit last year, but I don't think it's going to fall off the face of the earth.
Yeah, and I'm really interested offensively. No Chase Brown, but improving talent elsewhere, good offensive line, and then a new quarterback in Luke Altmaier. What do you think of Altmaier, talent-wise, Tom, being able to watch him a little bit in the time he did at Ole Miss, and how he can fit this offense as it tries to take another step?
Yeah, I think that, he doesn't have a ton of experience at the college level. I've always been able to see, like, when he was at Ole Miss, a couple games he played, I was able to watch that. But just from people I've talked to who have seen him a lot more, whether it was in camps as a high schooler coming out or just, in practice, I think Illini fans should probably not, don't get crazy, but there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about the kid's talent and what he's able to do. Like Tommy DeVito was probably the best quarterback Illinois has had since Nathan Shieldhouse.
Yep.
As good as that is, or as good as DeVito is, he was still limited in a lot of areas where I think Altmaier is an improvement. Like I think Altmaier is slightly more mobile than Tommy, and I think he's got a stronger arm than Tommy. So be able to push the ball down the vertically with accuracy. But again, I think some of that has to also be adjusted to with receivers. Like maybe Tommy DeVito's arm looks a lot better down the field if he had receivers who were better equipped to get down the field last year. So it might not be a fair comparison, but I think overall, talent-wise, Altmaier is an improvement over Tommy DeVito, and you get him for 3 years. So whereas Tommy had to come in, learn the new offense, and try to get things going right away, Altmaier will have time. So maybe even if he's not great in 2023, once he comes back for 2024 and maybe again for 2025, this is an offense that as that young receiver talent comes in, it starts to mature and figure things out. We're going to see, I think, steps forward in that area of the football, and I think that's huge because I think defensively, every Bret Bielema team is going to be solid. It's going to be fundamental. It might not be elite, but it's going to be good, and it's going to give you a very high floor. It's that offense starts improving, and we're not scoring 22 points a game, but we start scoring 30 points a game or 34 points a game. That's when that whole idea of Illinois playoff contender kind of becomes more of a realistic goal.
And Thomas, the last year probably of Big Ten divisions, as you mentioned, I want to get into your piece about figuring out how the scheduling is going to happen. But in this West, there's, as you said, Wisconsin, I like Fickle a lot. I like what they've added talent wise, but it always feels like there's going to be growing pains. And we saw last year when Illinois trounced them, they needed a lot of talent on that offensive side of the ball. I like Iowa a lot with how much defense it's bringing back, but we know offensively they are challenged. So who are you buying in this West? Who are you selling? And where do you have Illinois kind of figuring in all of this?
It's just as confusing as it was last year because I remember going into last season, I really had no idea who the best team in the division was going to be. I think I picked Wisconsin to finish first, but it was mostly just why not Wisconsin? It's got a pretty good track record. But I like Tanner Mordecai, I expect to be Wisconsin's starting quarterback. And Tanner put up really good numbers at SMU. But if you go in and look at the splits and look at how he performed against Power 5 competition, you will not be surprised to learn that he had much better numbers against Group of 5 teams than he did Power 5. He's not coming in as some sort of guy who's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the Big Ten. He might finish that way with numbers simply because of the offense he's in, but it's not like he's a blue chip player. So I do think Wisconsin will still lean on Braylon Allen and the run game and its defense, even if it looks different next year. And I still think that talent-wise, that's a good team. Coaching-wise, they've got a very good coaching staff. So I do not think Wisconsin is going to have the same kind of year it had last year. I expect it to be good.
Yeah.
Iowa's Iowa. It's just going to score. Well, it's got to score, what, 25 points a game now, I think. Brian Ferentz gets fired. It's going to score between 17 and 24 points per game, and it's still going to win most of those games because it is just really difficult to score points against it. Purdue, I don't know. I mean, it's Ryan's first year as a head coach. It's losing Jeff Brom, losing a lot of talent. It's probably going to be somewhat of a transition year. I think they're still going to be pretty decent. Nebraska, who the heck ever knows what to expect from Nebraska? I think they made a good hire with Matt Rule.
Yeah, it's a coaching upgrade, like we can say.
Yeah, agreed. A very, very solid coaching upgrade, both on and off the field. And then Minnesota, I mean, it's like you mentioned it earlier, like PJ Fleck's program is just kind of flying under the radar for a very solid program. Like the floor for that team has been raised significantly in recent years. So they're not going to be a pushover. Northwestern, I don't have high hopes for. So when I look at the division, I think Northwestern's going to be at the bottom. I don't think it's out of line to think Purdue's going to struggle and it's a brand new head coach and a coaching staff and, probably new quarterback. And then the other 5 teams, it's like any one of them can win it, including Illinois. And I think it's going to come down to just, it's going to be a few plays and a few games. It's probably going to end up deciding that division because I don't think any of those 5 teams are going to be good enough to really pull away from anybody else. So it's going to come down to which team makes the fewer mistakes. And that is so boring, but that's 100% what it's going to be. That's what it was this year. The team that makes the fewest mistakes is going to end up winning the game and going to end up winning the division.
And for once, you feel like Illinois can compete in that area. So that keep it close and find out what happens in the fourth quarter. You did, Tom, the tough exercise.
Oh.
I've been asked to do this so many times, and it's just so difficult because nothing is perfect. In separating what these pods are going to look like, because that's most likely what's going to happen with the new scheduling format. Similar to, I believe, the ACC, what they're doing with the 3-5-5, Big Ten go to 3-6-6. What was it like going through? What did you learn about doing this exercise, and what this means for the conference?
It was a fun thought experiment because there is no right answer, because there is no combination you can come to that makes sense. And that was the one thing. Like I published after doing about 1,000 different not 1,000, but I did about 10 different variations of what they could be. And the one that I felt was the most quote unquote sensible is the one that I published. But the whole point of it was, like I said, every single fan base is going to find something they don't like about this, because you cannot put USC and UCLA into the Big Ten and give them 3 quote unquote rivals and have it make sense. Them being in the conference doesn't make sense to begin with, unless you are trying to cash the checks from the TV network. So like, it's you put it out there and it's like you got like Michigan fans saying, well, we would rather have Minnesota than Rutgers. Well, of course you would. But Minnesota's already got, it's like, if I give you Minnesota and take Rutgers away, well, who am I going to give Rutgers to? And then it's like, no matter what you do, for every domino that you knock over or you move around, it changes everything dramatically for everybody else. And you also have to keep in mind the reason USC and UCLA are in the conference: television. Television is going to want a say in these games because the Big Ten's getting a lot of money from 3 different networks, and they're going to want as many good games to help justify the price that they're paying for these games as possible. So you have to keep the TV networks happy. You have to keep the schools and the fans happy with their traditional rivals and what they want. And you also have to find some competitive balance, because while the TV networks would be like, hey, we want Ohio State playing Michigan, Penn State, USC every year, not really fair to Ohio State to make them play that game. So it's an impossible tool. I tried to do as best as I could. And I also just tried to, with USC and UCLA, the things I tried to keep in mind were the travel's already nuts. Don't make them travel any further than they absolutely already have to. And then competitive balance. And then the only thing I really did that was just doesn't make sense, but it does make tons of sense in my mind, is I made USC's primary rival Michigan State, because it's the Trojans versus the Spartans. You get a Trojan horse trophy. It is absolutely perfect. And I figure like that, if you're trying to make them feel at home, giving them a rivalry like that with a rivalry trophy right off the bat, bang, you're part of the Big Ten culture, because God knows we love rivalry trophies in this conference.
We do. And you did a good job with Illinois, I believe, and I think Illinois fans would love what you have here. And I got it on our YouTube channel here, but yeah, like USC, when it comes down, they're still going to play Michigan and Ohio State every 2 years, right? Twice every 4 years, right? So you're still going to have those big games. But let's go to Illinois. I think I've said if you get Northwestern and Purdue, Illinois fans should be happy, even if they get Ohio State or USC or something of that ilk, because those are the two I think you want from both a competitive and a rivalry. Like those are the two biggest rivals. And I think Ryan Walters to Purdue only makes it better, adds to it. And then you have UCLA. So how did you come to UCLA, Illinois, and what do you think of that?
Well, for UCLA, and like I said with USC, my goal was to give them as short of a trip as possible. So I wanted to give them some of the Western schools in the conference already, or at least, what we used to think was West in the Big Ten. And oddly enough, the two teams, if you look at UCLA's history of current Big Ten schools, the two teams they've played the most often from the Big Ten are Nebraska and Illinois. So, I mean, we had fun in that Kraft Fight Hunger Bowl, so why not rekindle the rivalry of the Hunger Bowl and keep it going? So,
and go to the Rose Bowl every other year, Tom, I would love. So,
yeah, and I mean, it's like Illinois is never going to be a program that is going to recruit like deep in California, but getting to go there every other year kind of makes it, you've got an actual chance to get some recruits that you really have no shot at getting now.
That's right. So Tom, what is next when it comes to realignment? Because we got to pause, but we thought we had a pause, and then USC, UCLA happens, Texas, Oklahoma happens, and obviously we've seen some ADs in the ACC come out and really torch their current deal. What's going to happen in the Pac-12 with USC and UCLA leaving? Amazingly, the Big 12 feels like it's the most stable of those three, I guess. But for Big Ten fans, Illinois fans, like what is next for the Big Ten in all of this?
The Big Ten, I don't see the Big Ten doing anything for a couple of years. Like you just signed the new TV deal. There's really no immediate impetus to add. Like if the right schools like if Notre Dame called and said we won in the conference, the Big Ten would probably be like, all right, hold on, let's figure this out. But like even Oregon, Washington, I think that you want somebody else on the West Coast, ideally to pair with USC, UCLA to give them a travel partner. But the other thing we got to remember here too is the conference doesn't have a commissioner right now. It's hard to expand when you don't have anybody in charge of the conference. And I think we're going to need to see some dominoes fall. Like the Pac-12 is on shaky ground. Like they still don't have the TV deal. And that is really the only thing that holds any conference together these days. And from what I'm hearing, they're going to get a television deal, but it is not going to be anything what they probably would ideally hope for. Like, they keep getting connected to like places like Amazon. I think the general popular opinion is that Amazon wants to buy the entire Pac-12 and stream all the games. I don't think that's what Amazon wants at all. I think Amazon wants a Pac-12 game. It doesn't want all the Pac-12 games. And then you mentioned the ACC, like the saber rattling right now with Florida State and Clemson going out there and saying we want a bigger piece of the revenue pie because we actually put more money into football and football is driving the revenue. I said it on Cover 3 today. That to me, the ACC is a dead conference walking once that happens, because there's only two possible outcomes. Either Florida State, Clemson, and Miami and whoever else start getting a bigger cut of the money, which only leads to anger and animosity between all the other schools, which eventually leads to the conference dissolving, which we saw in the Big 12. Do we not remember what happened when the Big 12 was conceding everything to Texas? Texas A&M and Missouri left for the SEC, and now Texas and Oklahoma followed them there. Or Florida State and Clemson don't get what they want, and then they get stuck in that conference being unhappy, which they already are as they watch their competitors in the SEC and the Big Ten widen the gap revenue-wise, and they eventually jump ship for the SEC or the Big Ten on their own. So I look at the ACC. It might not look like it is now, but that's a dead conference walking. I feel like the Pac-12 is very much in danger. I think the Big 12 is the most stable, but that's only as long as the Big Ten and the SEC want it to be. And that's really the entire linchpin of all this. Stability is based on what the Big Ten and the SEC want to do. As soon as the Big Ten and the SEC decide they want to expand, it doesn't matter which conference appears stable to us right now. All that matters is which schools they want, because they will go and they will get them. They've done it time and time again. And that's the one theme we've seen through conference realignment. When the Big Ten and the SEC expand, they pluck from the other Power Fives. Those other Power Fives are then left having to pick from either each other or the group of five, which just weakens them as the Big Ten and the SEC strengthen. So no matter what happens, you can never tell what's going to go on in conference realignment. The only thing I think we can count on is it'll be the Big Ten and the SEC winning in the end.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Tom, before I let you go, I do want to ask, since you do the NFL draft stuff, Combine is this week, and Illinois has 4 guys there, 4 guys who all look like they will be drafted, and a couple of them pretty high. So what do you think of what these guys need to prove, or where they'll kind of end up, whether it's Devin Witherspoon, Sidney Brown, Quan Martin, Chase Brown?
You know, with Witherspoon, nobody I have talked to has anything bad to say about him. No. Like it's everybody gets nitpicked. Like all these players get nitpicked to death, and there will be some because he might not be as long, he might not be as fast, and that could all happen after the combine. But just as far as the way he plays and his production on the field, everybody loves him because he's got exactly what you want in a defensive back. Like short memory, all the confidence in the world, doesn't care if he makes a mistake. He's coming back the next snap and he's going to try to make the play. And he hits. He's not afraid for contact, which is something that you really want in a cornerback these days because you got to stop the run too. Quan Martin is a guy that I think, depending on how he tests, could really improve his stock because people do like him kind of as a free safety, kind of roaming in the secondary, kind of the same, similar to what Kirby was doing. And we saw how Kirby went in Detroit and how he's done for Detroit. And I think there's a lot of similarities there. I don't know if he's going to be a first or second day pick, but I do think he would be like an early 3rd round. Sidney Brown is another guy who I think if you talk to the scouts I've talked to kind of had an opinion on him as, okay, he's not great in coverage. He's mostly in box safety. But ever since the Senior Bowl, he's kind of opened some eyes. It's like, no, he could do more. It's like he wasn't asked to do all this stuff as much at Illinois, but he's got the ability to do it. So I think depending on how he performs at the combine, he could really open some eyes and improve his draft stock. And Chase Brown, it's always difficult to know with running backs because running backs are just they're in the eyes of most NFL teams, they're mostly a dime a dozen. Like you look at Bijan Robinson, who is a terrific running back prospect. If he gets taken in the 1st round, odds are it won't be to the very end of the 1st round because teams just do not want to use early draft picks on running backs. So for Chase, I think that the biggest questions about him will be how he runs and what he's able to do at the 40 time. And I think that will impact where he gets taken. I would not expect him to go before the 3rd round. I would probably think that I love him. I think he's going to be a good NFL player, probably looking at 5th, 6th kind of round in that, just because he's a running back, not because of his talent.
It's a good thing we're talking about this, though. That's a sign of a very healthy program, right?
It's so fun to be able to watch Illinois games and also get like my NFL draft prep done at the same time. But I'm not just watching the Ohio State or whoever they're playing that week. Like I'm watching them. It's just such a relief.
Tom Fornelli, CBS Sports, Cover 3 podcast. They're on my podcast downloads. They are fantastic. If you want a bigger swath of college football, they are the guys to listen to. They broke down the ACC challenges right now on this morning's podcast, so go check that out. Tom, appreciate the time, man.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Jeremy.